Hello, my name is Brandon Ramacco, and today I'd like to talk about research in healthcare. Now, in particular, I work with nerve and muscle and joint problems, so that's sort of the type of research I'm going to focus on. But some of what I'm going to say is universal for all research in healthcare. Now, research in healthcare sucks. It pretty much all sucks, but to different degrees. It is often of low quality, but even the highest quality studies can fail to give meaningful and relevant clinical results for treating an individual patient. Now, before we get into more details, let's talk about the types of studies. Now, let's start with a case study. A case study or a case series is a study with one or a small group of patient stories. These are often plagued with many biases, confirmation, survivorship, attribution, etc. These might be the only types of studies available for rare presentations of diseases or unconventional treatments. They are normally only written in cases where the treatment worked and the success is often attributed to the treatment. For many problems, the body heals on its own over time, so it may be improper to attribute success to that treatment. Now, when people get better over time, sometimes that's called regression to the mean. Mean as in average. That's a math term for average. So over time, people return to the average. Now, you can have a larger study with the same types of flaws. If they don't have a proper comparison or a proper placebo, that can bias the results. If I set up a study, let's say I have a pill that's supposed to heal wounds. And so I take 100 people with cuts on their arm and I give them a pill. And I do a follow-up, let's say a year later. Wow, 100% of them, the cut healed. They're no longer bleeding. My pill fixes wounds. It heals wounds. It stops bleeding. Obviously, if you did a comparison or placebo, you'd find, oh, my pill doesn't do anything. People just got better on their own. But without the placebo, without the comparison, right, that's the conclusion you would come to. The next one I'll talk about will be RCTs, which are randomly controlled trials. And this type of study involves randomly assigning participants. And you often have multiple groups, right? Now, it's hard to have a proper comparison group depending on the type of treatment. For example, how do you have a placebo acupuncture group? Like, what's placebo acupuncture? How do you have a placebo exercise? How do you think you've done exercise without actually doing exercise? Right? So it's sometimes hard to have a placebo. In those cases, it's easier to have a non-treatment group or to compare with another type of treatment. But even for drugs, you might think it's easy to have a placebo group. Oh, it's just a sugar pill. But there's something called the active placebo effect. In the trial with the placebo, if the patient has side effects, they might assume that they're receiving the real drug. Oh, I got the real drug for sure. This is going to work. Oh, yeah, because my stomach's upset. Oh, yeah, it's going to work for sure. And they do find if they give a placebo pill which contains a drug of some sort with some side effects, they do get a stronger placebo effect. Let's say you have the perfect drug study, or what you think is the perfect drug study. Well, what group are you studying it in? Are you studying it for average people? If you average the results, you might miss subgroup information. Maybe the drug works well for athletes and not for the obese. Maybe for the young and not the old. When it comes to drugs, there are a dozen genetic polymorphisms that affect the body's ability to process drugs. The dosage might be too much for some and not enough for others. And while you can get genetic testing for this, it isn't just one enzyme for all drugs, so a person might be fine for some drugs but not for others. Do you do your drug studies by group? Do you do an average? Should everyone have these polymorphisms studied genetically, these SNPs? Who knows? Right? It just means that average results might not work for everybody. People's diets and other drugs or botanicals also affect drug processing too. Also, many studies are done in a petri dish or on animals, and you have to ask the question, can the results apply to humans? Now, you really don't know. Sometimes it's true, and sometimes it's not. Another example study I often give is a study involving low back pain and heel lifts, where they found a 100% success rate for reducing pain when they followed up 1 year later. Now, that's amazing. Fire the spine surgeons, fire the physiotherapists, fire all the chiropractors, send them back to school to learn how to code. All we need is custom heel lifts. Now, if you look at all the research on heel lifts, you start to get a picture that on average, the benefit of heel lifts is non-existent or it's minimal. Maybe there's some people, again, when you're taking averages, maybe there's some people who benefit a lot from it. There's some people who respond negatively to it, and that can sort of average out to no result, right? So I'm not saying they're useless. Now, does this mean that whenever you're looking for research that you have to basically give yourself a full-time job and look at all the research? Well, no, there's people who've done this for you. There's types of research studies that summarize the research for you. They're sometimes called narrative reviews or systematic reviews or a meta-analysis. Now, a narrative review summarizes the research in words. A systematic review compiles and summarizes the data. A meta-analysis is a systematic review where they try to put the data from multiple studies together. Now, even these summaries can be flawed. Remember that every individual may respond differently. Maybe it works for Europeans, but not for Asians. Maybe it works for the tall and not the short. Maybe it works for tension-type headaches, but not for migraines. Which leads to another point. Is a diagnosis even accurate? There are 200 types of headaches, so if there's a study on headaches, what type of headache does that study actually talk about? Let's talk about the tibialis posterior tendon problems. Those are often misdiagnosed about 85% of the time. So if someone has ankle pain, maybe a percentage of the people in an ankle pain study, instead of a sprain, they have a tibialis posterior tendinopathy, tendon problem. Here's another one. People still get diagnosed with trochanteric bursitis, despite that being an out-of-date, archaic term, which could mean a handful of different pathologies, some which require surgery, others requiring muscle treatments, and some requiring rehab. So for a research study on trochanteric bursitis, if treatment works 25% of the time, what's the actual pathology of the people it worked on? And what even counts as success in these studies? Now, when I ask an average person, what would you consider a success? Most people will say, well, if it gets rid of the problem, if the person's cured. Now, if you ask someone who's in a lot of pain, oh, success if you could knock my pain down from a 9 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10. And research is actually like that. It's considered a success. Sometimes it's complete resolution. Other times it's any improvement. Now, if you apply those two different criteria to, for example, carpal release surgeries for carpal tunnel syndrome, so hand pain and hand weakness, has somewhere between either a 30% success rate or a 95% success rate. Once I started imaging people's median nerves at the wrist using the ultrasound imaging, I found that less than half actually had an angry nerve at the carpal tunnel. And these are people saying, yeah, I have carpal tunnel. I've had it for years, chronic. The doctor said so. And of course, some of them even had the carpal tunnel release surgery. Yeah, I did the surgery. It didn't really help me. And as I said, over half of them had nothing going wrong with the nerve at the wrist. That means the problem is somewhere else for those individuals. Could be muscle trigger points in the forearm, because those can refer pain into the hand and wrist. Or the nerve could be irritated more proximally, which actually leads to my next point. People can have overlapping problems too. Carpal tunnel syndrome is a great example. You can have an irritated nerve at the wrist. It can be at the pronator teres. It can be at the clavicle. It can be at the neck. You can have this irritated nerve and you can have muscle pains here that are, the pain is here, but you don't feel it here. You feel it sort of spreading into the hand. So pronator teres is a muscle where if you have trigger points, if you press here, you can sometimes feel the pain spread to the hand. So you could have both the muscle pain and a nerve issue. You're not necessarily limited to just one, and the nerve could be irritated at multiple locations. If you treat one, you get a little relief, but not full relief. Just treating one problem won't cure the patient. All of the problems have to be treated. Now let's actually talk about the neck. When someone has a neck pain or neck problems, sometimes just one treatment is enough and they feel great for months and months and months. For others, multiple treatments are necessary to recover. Let's say whiplash, they often require time to get better. And for others, neck pain just comes back and back and back. It's muscle pain, so you treat the muscles, they're chronic, they say, oh, my neck muscles are so tight. You treat them and their neck muscles are tight the next day, and the pain comes back basically the next day. So in part, they got relief. So in part, the problem is muscle pain. But there's an underlying issue. Now, I actually had this issue as well, so I can talk from experience. I've helped lots of people with this. Typically, the underlying issue is a neuromuscular coordination issue and weakness of the very deep neck muscles, the longus colli muscles. And so if you strengthen those muscles, if you relearn the control segment to segment of the neck, typically once you treat the neck muscles, you treat the muscle pain, the muscles stay relaxed, the longer muscles stay relaxed for much, much longer, and someone's chronic neck problems can go away for good, or at least with a little bit of maintenance, it becomes much more manageable because you're getting to the root of the problem. It was multiple things on top of each other. I just did the neuromuscular re-education exercises. They might still have the muscle pain, right? It required both treatments. Going back to studies, did they even use the right treatment in the study? Now, over the years, many botanicals, you pull a botanical off a shelf, oh, this is supposed to be good for something. Now, they've studied that botanical, and some of them contain none of the active ingredient. It says it contains this. They put through a study, they study the chemistry, and it doesn't contain any, or contains much less than it says. Well, then, if a treatment study used that bottle, then that treatment study doesn't actually say whether that chemical is good or not, whether that botanical works or not. Now, there are many studies involving squats. Now, are they all doing squats the same depth? Should they be doing squats the same depth? Toes straight or toes out? Like, what are you going to do with your patient? Is what you're going to do with your patient related to the research study, with how they did in the research study? Let's talk about chiropractic adjustments, the quick joint manipulations. Often the higher quality studies are done by physiotherapists. And then if the results are negative, chiropractors are like, well, the physiotherapist didn't know what he was doing. Maybe, maybe not. Can you trust those results? Here's another one for you. Now, cranberries are known as a remedy for UTIs, particularly cranberry juice. And if you look at all the research, remember the flaws of looking with all the research, the consensus really is that it shouldn't be recommended because it doesn't seem to help the average person on average. And this is the reasoning. When you look at cranberries, there seems to be an active ingredient that actually inhibits the bacteria from sticking to the walls of the urethra. So in theory, cranberries should help UTIs based on that chemical. But cranberry juice is full of sugar, which tends to make UTIs worse. So you have this benefit, and then you have this downside, and they seem to cancel each other out. Now, what if you took that active ingredient from cranberries and you got rid of the sugar? Then in theory, it should work. And what drives me crazy is they keep on doing studies on cranberry juice when they should be doing studies on cranberry extract or extracts of this chemical. Now, as a little aside, I did a little case series. Every female friend and person or even patient I've heard that has chronic UTIs, particularly related to intercourse, I've told, hey, try cranberry pills and take it around the time that you have intercourse, right before or right after, for a couple of days. And everyone who's followed my advice, they've gone back to me, or everyone who has gone back to me, again, maybe there's some bias here. It seems like everyone I told has gone back to me. They've said that their UTIs have gone way, way down. And when they forget to take the pills, they get another UTI again. So it seems to be that the pills are really helping. Again, the research doesn't say cranberry helps when they look at systematic review because they're looking at cranberry juice and not the cranberry pills. So to summarize everything, I'm sorry to say that you need to take all healthcare-related research with a grain of salt, both positive and negative. If you want to Google a research study, I recommend including the terms narrative review or systematic review, and this will help you get those summary papers. Also, it's useful to see comparative studies. So you can search something like corticosteroid injections compared to PRP for tendon pain, SSRIs compared to exercise for depression or anxiety. And it's useful to see things compared to something else instead of in a vacuum. Now, before I finish, I'll share a couple of perhaps surprising results that you find when you start to dive deeper into research. Corticosteroids, now doctors are sometimes very quick to grab a needle full of corticosteroids. Yeah, I have shoulder pain, and before you know it, patient has a needle in their arm. Oh, elbow pain, or the needle in the arm. Now, they're not necessarily injecting corticosteroids, but most of them are. And the more recent research and systematic reviews, meta-analysis, and even the in vitro studies looking at the effect on sort of the small scale is corticosteroids are damaging to tendons. They do not help in the healing process. They do help a little bit with pain, but they're damaging to tendon tissue, so it's not recommended. Other alternatives are recommended over corticosteroids. Here's another one, SSRIs. These SRI antidepressants are no better than placebo for most. Now, I'm not saying if you're on SSRIs to just stop taking them. Don't do that because they actually form a chemical dependence, and coming off SSRIs, if you're not doing it carefully, you can go through basically withdrawal and your symptoms can get much worse. So be careful. But yeah, no better than placebo for most. Does that mean they're worthless? Not necessarily. It turns out placebo actually works very well, and doctors can't prescribe placebo. So what's a doctor supposed to do? Although if you look at those comparative studies, SSRIs versus counseling versus exercise or combinations, really if a doctor's doing a good job, they shouldn't necessarily go straight to SSRIs, or they should do SSRIs combined with something else. Because that's where the research sort of points to. Now, the next one's going to be really important to hear for a lot of people. Degenerative changes like disc degeneration, hip osteoarthritis, wear and tear type arthritis, they are unlikely to cause pain. I'll say that again. They're unlikely to cause your pain. It's possible that they're causing their pain. It's possible that they're contributing to your pain. Remember, there can be multiple things stacking on top of each other. There is a slight correlation between these findings and people having pain, although it's perhaps that there's one cause resulting in these imaging findings that's also resulting in the pain. So there's no causative relationship. But the reason why I'm saying that's unlikely to cause pain is because these findings are extremely common in people with no pain. So if they're extremely common in people with no pain, you can't look at an x-ray and say, yeah, that's causing your pain. If you start MRIing people with no back pain, you find that 30% of people are diagnosed with a disc herniation. A disc herniation. Now, it's unlikely to be a fresh disc herniation, and when you have a disc herniation, the MRI findings can last for basically forever. But of course, if you have back pain, a doctor looks at the MRI, yep, that's the source of your pain. It's that disc herniation that I see on MRI. You can't be certain. You can't be certain. I remember one patient, hip osteoarthritis, was told was going to have to do the surgery, hip replacement. But when I actually listened to what her pain was like, I was like, that sounds like nerve pain or muscle pain. That doesn't sound like joint, like osteoarthritis type pain. And I think it took 3 sessions, and her pain went to 0. And of course, she canceled the surgery and didn't get her hip replaced because she had no pain. A lot of people with hip osteoarthritis diagnosed on X-ray have no pain. These are pain-free individuals, surprisingly. And if you make sense, if you think about it as pain as a protection mechanism, does it make sense for alarm bells to ring about just some wear and tear that your body can't do anything about? And this wear and tear, it's more as bony, age-related changes. That's how I prefer to describe it as. These bones change over time. These changes over time that your body has no control over, does it make sense to self-alarm bells? No. It makes sense to self-alarm bells with pain when something's broken, when something's not working right, not with just these changes over time. So what is the cause of these people's pain? It's more likely to be related to muscles, tendons, nerves, or a combination of these things um, that have to be treated. Now, thank you for listening to my rant. I wish you guys all the best. Cheers.